Chapter 32. Sasuke's body remained still in the ground he died in. The rain had since filled a small pond in the opening where his throat once was before Tamamaru tore it out. Kisame knelt down beside Sasuke's corpse as he sighed. Looks like we lost another one. Coming out of the small group of trees, Zetsu stopped a few feet behind him. His throat was completely torn out. That must have been painful. It was a bite mark. I told Sasuke he had gotten sloppy. He paid for not adhering my warning. Indeed. Kisame replied. But there's nothing here. Blood most likely from another person. Though it looks like they've left already. I think it was Guy's team. They made it past you, Kisame, and you're much stronger than Sasuke is. It doesn't matter. We'll need to report this. All I needed to do was buy time. Had I wanted to kill him and his student, it wouldn't have been much trouble. Kisame said as he stood back up, taking another glance down at Sasuke's glued face. His entire face spoke thousands of words he felt only he could understand by knowing Itachi for as long as he did. Shame. He said as he turned and walked off away from Zetsu, who continued to examine the scene. He's taking this too personal. It reminds him of Itachi. Poor guy. His time alone was brief as Zetsu turned around to be face to face with another man. Roughly his height minus the flytrap jaws, wearing an orange swirling mask over his face with only one hole over his right eye. He wore the standard Akatsuki robe just like Zetsu and Kisame. Sasuke's dead. Indeed. He replied. It wasn't Guy or anyone on his squad that did it. He stepped a few feet in front of him as he watched the stream carry its slow current down. What is our next step, Madara? Our numbers and support are at an all-time low. We three are the only remaining members. Madara lowly chuckled to himself. Not necessarily. If my sources are correct, we should be expecting our next candidate soon. Will you finally reveal yourself? Kisame is under the impression you died with Deidara as Tobi. No. There will be no need. Madara replied, placing a hand on Zetsu's shoulder. Because I am turning over leadership of the Akatsuki to you. In face anyway. Wow. Really? Cool. Shut up, fool, I don't think we're cut out for it, Madara. He replied. You have nothing to worry about. Like I said, it will only be in face value. Nothing will change and I will keep my alias as Tobi for the time being. Zetsu nodded. As you wish. We won't let you down. Scene change, Madara and Zetsu made their way into the old compound, finding themselves in the dimly lit chamber where it was apparent much fighting had happened. Small craters, broken pillars and two bodies laid on the floor. One in the center on a small plateau, the other off to the side. Ah. Looks like Kabuto didn't make it either. Zetsu knelt down and reached into Kabuto's pockets, hoping to find something, coming across a syringe filled with blood. He smiled as he lifted it up and showed it to Madara. It doesn't matter. He had what we were after. Indeed. Madara replied as he took the syringe from them and held it. We won't need this right now, but it is good we hold on to it for safekeeping. How much longer do we need to wait? Be quiet. Planning something of this scale takes time, years. Madara stepped away from Kabuto's body and began walking towards the exit. I can't say, but I'm assured the wait is worth it. You shouldn't trust him. He is the type that stabs others in the back. Are you sure this is a good idea? The Uchiha chuckled. No. It's actually quite a bad idea, but I'm desperate. And he could get me exactly what I want while I play his subordinate. Scene change, Kisame took a liking to being by himself since Itachi died. He respected his partner and mourned his death in private, but it was a sense of peace for the not-so-peaceful missing Nin. The rain had since lightened to a small drizzle as he approached a small collection of trees covering a mossy boulder. Release. He said in front of it. A large purple character lit up as Kisame stepped through it. When he stepped through, he found himself in the main location of the Akatsuki hideout. He tried to call it a hideout, all of them did, but it was just a large empty house. He stepped into the living room, 4 large leather couches and a plain square coffee table in the middle of them. To the left of it was the kitchen, though it did not appear nearly as big due to the small island in the middle of it. He remembered a few instances back when Deidara and Sasori would be arguing about art each on one side of the island while Kisame watched them from the living room, being an unfortunate audience member. Flashback: Look, Sasori, my man, I respect you, don't get me wrong. You're a fellow artist like I am, but you just don't understand the true beauty behind my art, real art, yeah. Sasori carried his ever-usual tired look on his face as he scooped in another spoonful of cereal. How can something that blows up be considered beautiful? Real art is constant, eternal, for all to see and cherish. Their bickering continued back and forth, their voices growing louder and louder until it became near shrieking. The two artists failed to notice Haiden and Kakuzu stepping in from the sleeping quarters. Kakuzu normally kept his mask off inside the hideout, giving him a much more difference in appearance, almost human aside from the stitches on his face and his eyes. Okay, maybe he was still very different even without the mask. But it was nice to know he at least looked partially human to some of the others. Are they seriously discussing art again? Kakuzu asked, annoyed, as they walked into the kitchen. Fuck. I hate this shit. Haiden said back. Kakuzu sighed as he opened the refrigerator and pulled out leftover rice from the night before and walked off. Haiden set his scythe down and looked around inside. All the eggs were gone, but he did find a box of heatable bacon, egg, and cheese biscuits, half empty but still 3. He picked them out and placed them into the microwave, setting the timer and trying to tune out the yapping going on behind him. How can you consider puppets beauty? Much less art? Deidara said. Simple. You can at least see the puppets for more than a second. Art is not an explosion, and there's nothing beautiful about sculpting something just to blow it up. Sasori replied. The timer looked like it was slowing down, which drove Haiden crazy as their arguing began to get louder and louder. Fuck. Hurry up, you fucking ass biscuits. Your art is mediocre at best. You go through all the effort of making them last forever, but they still suck, yeah. Deidara shouted. At least people will notice my creations. All they'll see is a crummy explosion and wonder, gee. What was that? Something just blew up. Haiden finally turned around. Shut the fuck up. Deidara and Sasori both turned in shock at Haiden. Your shitty art arguments drive me and everyone else fucking nuts. Fuck. You know what I think? Both of you two are fucking fags. The microwave beeped, catching the Jashinist's attention. Oh sweet. Biscuits are done. Haiden opened the microwave and pulled the hot plate out. Stuff like a hot plate didn't really bother him. He was used to putting a pole through his chest every time he killed for Jashin, so he dealt with it. Deidara stood up with one hand up, ready to throw clay at Haiden with his back turned, but Sasori caught his hand. He looked down at the redhead, who just shook his head. The blonde sat back down and huffed. Haiden walked out of the kitchen but turned back around. Art is death. And I'm more than a master painter. Next time you two start bitching about what's real art, I'll be sure to paint you a picture. He said before taking a bite out of a biscuit and walked off. I hate that guy, yeah, said Deidara. Sasori nodded his head. End flashback. Kisame was back in the sleeping quarters, turning left down the hall to the den. He opened the door and stepped inside. The light was still on, in fact nothing had moved since he was last in it. In the center of the room was a shogi board, pieces scattered across the board with 2 chairs on each side pushed away from the board game. He walked over to the board and sat on the side of white. He remembered this game, his game. Flashback: Itachi and Kisame sat across from each other watching the board as Itachi placed one of his pieces over in front of his king to protect it from one of Kisame's pieces. Your move, he said as he let go of the piece. The swordsman looked at the board. Itachi had beaten him almost every time they played, and jokingly he accused him of cheating by using his Sharingan. The Uchiha complied to make it obvious he was not using his Kekkei Genkai, though he wasn't sure how he could exactly prove it when Kisame was watching the board and not paying attention to him. The move finally hit him. Kisame placed his hand onto his piece that could move in an L shape, and the light coming into the doorway was blocked out. Itachi. Kisame. The two Akatsuki turned and looked at the doorway to find Pain standing there with his arms down. Kisame and Itachi looked at each other and nodded. Scene change, they both stood on the roof of one of the buildings in the abandoned Uchiha hideout. Itachi walking ahead of Kisame, finally stopping. He remained facing forward. Kisame, he said. I'm afraid this is where we say goodbye. HM? He said, confused. That game of shogi. Go back and finish it. You can win the game in one more turn and it's your move. It should be simple to figure out. He said, taking a few more steps towards the edge. He halted his movement as he caught a harsh cough. I see. He replied. I don't think Sasuke will let anyone else fight with him, but just to be safe only allow him to pass. He nodded even though he knew Itachi couldn't see him. I'll take care of it. He said in a much more calmer tone. Itachi turned his head and gave a weak and faint smile. Thank you, friend. And with that he jumped away from him to prepare for his final battle against his little brother. End flashback, he sat Samahata down on the table next to the shogi board. He examined it really hadn't been moved since their last game. The dust coating the pieces only assured him. He wondered if anyone had even been in the room since that day. Then again, a large number of the Akatsuki had been killed at that point, but it was still an eerie feeling even for someone like him. He took a closer look and tried to think back to that day. He knew he had a move he was planning to do, then it hit him. His L movement piece. He remembered as he touched it and moved it over, capturing Itachi's king. But he still didn't understand what he meant. So he thought about the situation. The piece had captured from the right side. Itachi had set up a powerful defense on the left, making it almost impossible to get in. In fact, he practically forced every single piece to that side. It was almost as if I see. He said out loud. This is what you were trying to tell me all along. He sighed. That boy had a hard life. Maybe better that it ended up this way. Scene change, for in the morning. The lights were all on inside the hospital room. The quiet but steady beeping of a heart rate was the only thing keeping Sakura awake as she sat at the edge of the bed holding Kiba's hand with both of hers while she watched his unconscious body, his Nin dog, resting in the corner of the room. He was like that since her and Akamaru found him lying in the ground. Flashback, Kiba. Sakura yelled to stand out in the rain. He was lying still on his side with his back facing them. She quickly examined the situation as she knelt down beside him. Sasuke was close by, though when she looked at him he was clearly dead. She returned her attention to Kiba and noticed the dog laying across from him. Who's that? She asked out loud. Arf. Akamaru sniffed his master, then sniffed to Mamoru's body. He whimpered at the realization the old German shepherd had died, but kept his hopes up when he could hear Kiba's heart still beating. Sakura quickly set her mind to medic as she unzipped Kiba's vest, followed by her ripping the front of his shirt open. She placed her hands over his heart and listened in carefully. It was slow, dangerously slow, but not stopped. 20 beats per minute. God, I have to stop this. I have to raise it. She said out loud as she concentrated more. Systolic and diastolic blood pressures 90/50. /N both of my parents were paramedics, so I can tell you for a fact that 20 BPM is dangerously low. Average healthy rate is between 60-100. Systolic and diastolic should be at about 120/80, so anything beyond that equals bad. Tongue sticking out, it was no use. She tried to focus her chakra to try and steadily raise his heart rate, but she couldn't even bring enough strength to do it. She started crying in frustration. I can't lose you again. I'm not losing you again. She turned around the moment she heard Akamaru bark. When she looked, she noticed two figures coming closer. Her heart raced but slowed as they came into a clearer visibility. Kakashi-sensei. She said weakly, looking over to the other figure, Lord Raikage. Kakashi knelt down next to Sakura, holding her shoulders and breathing a deep sigh. You're okay. Good. Kakashi-sensei. Kiba, I know. He said. We don't have a lot of time to talk. The Raikage notified Lady Tsunade. She'll meet us at the hospital back at the village. We're going back to the Leaf? Kiba won't make it. I notified our best doctors. They'll be waiting for you all back at the Cloud, said the Raikage. But we must go now if you want to save him. Weakly she nodded, standing up. She still had enough strength to move, which made the job easier for them. A walked over to Kiba's body and picked it up, slumping it over his shoulders as he and Sakura along with Akamaru took off towards the village. But Kakashi stayed a moment longer, staring at the body of the dog laying there. He knelt down, already coming to the realization of who it was. He examined his wounds and glanced over at Sasuke's throat. I see you protected your master's son and killed Sasuke in the process. He stood up, taking another look at the aged version of the dog he remembered seeing far too long ago. Good job, Mamoru-sensei would have been proud. End flashback. A knock at the door caught Sakura off guard as she glanced up. Tsunade entered the room with heavy bags under her eyes and her arms crossed. Well? Sakura asked shyly. Tsunade shook her head. There's never been a written report, file, documentary, or even a note on a survivor who's used the Gate of Death. She sighed. He's in a coma right now. We spent hours using as much chakra as we could to elevate his heart rate without killing him, but he's too far gone. Sakura's eyes stung from the tears welting up. Kiba looked peaceful there in the bed. Cleaned up, sleeping like a baby. She looked up at the machine taking his vitals. 17 BPM, he's practically dead already. There's also something I need to talk to you about, Sakura. Tsunade said. You told me when you came in you tried to heal him, yet the chakra in your system was refusing to respond, correct? She sniffed, but she nodded. That's right. Tsunade walked over to Sakura's side and placed her hand on her shoulder. You couldn't have used your remaining chakra to try and heal Kiba because you're carrying. Sakura's eyes shot wide open with surprise and possibly horror. Sasuke, no, that was too soon. It has to be Kiba's. You didn't know? Sakura shook her head. No, I had no idea. How long? Tsunade took her hand and rested it on Sakura's sore stomach. She concentrated for a moment and released her hand. You're going on about 3 weeks. She sighed with relief. Good, then it's Kiba's, Lady Tsunade. She said quietly. Kiba told me Kakashi took our son back to the village. She nodded. He did. Your parents are down in the nursery watching him. I need to check him again anyway. Might do you some good to walk around. She sighed. Maybe she was right. She never left the bedside since he was finally settled in. She wasn't even paying attention to time as it went from early evening to early morning in what felt like the blink of an eye. Okay, she said as she stood up. She glanced over at Kiba's body, the rhythmic beeping of the machine the only noise constant in the room. She leaned down and kissed him before caressing his forehead. I love you. She walked out of the room and into the hallway as Tsunade began running her routine tests. She closed the door behind her and headed downstairs to see her parents, whom she felt like she hadn't seen in forever. She was a total mess. She was still sweaty, smelt awful, and was still bruised and cut from everything happening. At the very least, she could please herself with the knowledge of knowing they took the time to make the trip to see her. Then again, if it was your child, wouldn't you? Scene change. Finally downstairs, she patted herself down before coming to the door of the nursery. She could hear talking behind the door, so she carefully placed her hand on the handle, turned, and opened the door. She stepped in and surprisingly the room was very spacious. A television sat on the wall next to the door when she walked in, probably explaining the noise at the door. 2 benches parallel to each other sat in the middle of the room, each on one opposite side. The tile was white, as were the walls, typical layout for most hospitals. It was nice to know the Cloud wasn't so much different than the Leaf. And on the other side of the room 2, or rather 3 familiar faces sat there. In 2 chairs on the left was Sakura's father, who was watching TV but turned his face to see his daughter walking in. He stood up. Easily over 6 feet tall, with short spiky brown hair maybe a few inches shorter than Kiba's at most, and wore a simple short brown kimono with a black sash around the waist and simple black pants. The one thing that distinguished him as her father were his eyes. Emerald green, just like hers, or rather where she got it from. In the right chair sat Tsum holding a sleeping Kayasado while Kuramaru laid at the side of the chair. "Sakura," said her father in a deep but calm voice. Her eyes filled with happiness. It had been so long since she had seen them, and it wasn't too long ago she had thought she would never see any of them again. "Daddy," she said before breaking into a sprint, grabbing hold of him and hugging him tightly. The hug was tight, but he paid no mind to it as he held his daughter tightly back. "Your mother and I came as soon as we heard," he said. Kiba's mother was already here when we arrived and explained to us what had happened. He pulled away from her and examined her. He knew something was wrong. "Are you okay?" She shook her head. "No, Daddy, I'm not. And I don't even know where to begin." "Woof." Kuramaru barked lightly next to Tsum, suggesting he already knew what was the problem. Tsum nodded her head but kept it to herself. She had a feeling it would not be something she could just tell anyone, and it was not her place. She simply rocked her grandson back and forth and watched their reunion. "Where's Mom?" "She went to go get some snacks for all of us while we waited for you," he said, sitting down on one of the couches as she joined him. "We've been here a while, so we know that Guy had a team go after you and Kiba was on that team." She nodded. "Yeah. He's being checked out by the Hokage Sakura," Tsum said. "The doctors weren't very keen on telling us the details, but I know something is wrong." "Tell me, is Kiba all right?" Sakura was frozen for a split second. How could she spill the news to his mother that Kiba was going to die? "What could you say?" "Well, Tsum, Kiba decided to use a kenjutsu that nobody has ever survived from, and now his heart rate is only working at barely 1/3 of what it's supposed to be at while he's in a coma. Other than that, he's great." "Wanna go see him?" she thought to herself. Luckily, some more time was bought for her as she heard an older female voice call her. "Sakura." Sakura turned around to see her mother holding a few bags of chips in her hands. If Sakura inherited her eyes from her father, she definitely inherited everything else from her mother. She was only a few inches taller than her daughter, carrying a red dress very similar to the one she wore at one point while she was still a genin, with a long-sleeved white shirt underneath it and long black leggings ending at her knees. Her eyes were a light red and her hair was the same color as Sakura's, though not exactly the same shade. It was just a tad bit darker and ended at about the middle of her back. "Mom." She smiled as her mother joined them on the couch, laying the chips on a coffee table in front of them. The three Harunos kept on with their conversation as Tsum decided to stand up and go check on her son herself. Before that, she walked over to Sakura and offered Kayasado to him. "I'm going to go check on Kiba. I think your boy here misses you." She smirked. Sakura smiled as she took her son back into her arms. "Lady Tsunade is working on him right now. She still might be there." Tsum nodded as her and Kuramaru left the room and made their way to find him. "He's gorgeous," her mother said. "What a shame he doesn't really look like you, Sakura," her father said in a playful manner. "Looks like he resembles his father more than anything else." "That reminds me," Sakura said as a light went off in her head. "You two never met Kiba, have you?" They both shook their heads. "We saw that picture of you two and his dog Akamaru," her mother said. "Did you know there's a crack in that frame? You should fix it." "Okay, Mom." She sighed. She still needed to get some of her stuff out of their house and bring it into hers, but that was way on the bottom of her list of things to do. Scene change. Knock knock. Tsum and Kuramaru waited outside the door for a response. She glanced over at the number on the door. Her senses did not fail her, but she had nothing else to do besides wait, so she looked just to be sure. Kuramaru's ears perked up. He smelt something else in the room. Something old but familiar. "What do you smell?" Tsum asked. He scoffed. "It must be the hospital getting to me." "It's nothing, thought I smelt someone." "I smell him too." "I see. It's mixed with blood." Their conversation was cut short as the door opened. "Hello, Tsum," said Tsunade. "Lady Tsunade. How is he?" Tsunade let them in, Akamaru wagging his tail slightly at the sight of a friendly face. Well, two friendly faces. He's stable, but he hasn't woken up since Sakura found him. His mother stood by the bedside that Sakura stood at and looked down at him. She glanced over at the machine taking his vitals, frowning to herself at how slow his heart rate was. How did this happen? She asked. Kiba opened all of the 8 inner gates in his fight against Sasuke. Sakura and the rest of the team saw it. She was surprised, shocked even. But she didn't let it show. She simply kept her eyes on him. There's nothing else you can do? Tsunade shook her head. I'm sorry, Tsum. At this point all we can do is wait and see. The mother said nothing but nodded her head. Tsunade had done all she could do, so she left the room so that she could be alone with her son. The thought of losing him hearing the flat line broke her. She let out all her pent-up emotions onto him as she sobbed into his chest. Not again, this is just like last time, I can't even save my own family first and now you. Her weeping stilled as she laid her head still on his chest. She hadn't slept in days, much less let out all what she needed to. Slowly she felt her fatigue catch up with her as she closed her eyes and fell into sleep. Scene change, the walk to the afterlife was not a short walk. Even more so when poor Kayasato had to start over from being brought back. Luckily the bridge extension from the dock still stayed up, so he wasted no time. And above all else it was dead quiet. His footsteps were the only type of sound he could hear. But suddenly he froze in his tracks. He heard something sad. Was somebody crying? Who's there? He asked. But there was no one. He turned around the dock and the fields were miles and miles away and no one was in sight. He looked forward and nothing was there either. He looked to the right off of the bridge and was taken off guard by what he saw. In the reflection of the water was an image, a present image by the look of it, of Tsum sobbing into Kiba, who laid still on a hospital bed. Tsum? Kiba! He yelled to them, but they didn't hear him. Kiba was still like a rock and his wife didn't hear him. What happened? He asked to the river, but it gave no response. No one gave a response. He had to figure it all out on his own. Something I can help you with? Or do you like talking to rivers? Said another voice with a laugh followed by a set of snorts. Kayasato quickly turned to the right. Standing no more than 5 feet away from him was a person? It didn't look like it. He looked more like a blue bug. Roughly almost 3 feet tall, wearing a long black robe and a black cap with antennas sticking out them. He had dark sunglasses over his eyes and seemed a bit overweight. Above his hat, merely a few inches, was a halo telling Kiba's father this person had already passed away as well. Who are you? Kayasato asked. Oh, no one. Just taking a walk is all, until I noticed a dead guy talking to a river. He replied. The Inuzuka noticed he had a slight lisp in his speech. He said nothing back as he stared back into the river and at the scene he saw already. The short man walked up next to him and glanced in as well. Family? He asked. He nodded. My wife Tsum and my son Kiba. Yes, I see. He said. Do you know why the River of Death is showing you this? Kayasato looked confused. No, I have no idea. It means you have unfinished business. It made sense to him. He even recalls the fight he had with Tsum before he went off to find Sasori before he died. He had closure with his kids and twice with Kiba for that matter, but never with his wife. Maybe you're right. He replied. Oh no, I'm right, all right. He laughed, snorting halfway during his chuckles. But I think I can help you out if you can do me a favor. He looked confused. What could a dead guy do to help another dead guy? Sure, what kind of favor were you looking for? Oh well, I'm not going to tell you now. It'll be later on. In the meantime, I think I can help you find your closure with your wife. He said as he waddled over to the edge of the walkway and peered into the reflection. Wait. How can you see this? Kayasato asked. He snort, you really must not know who I am. That's okay, it's not important. He said, straightening his back up. Now then. Just place your hand on my back and think. Your thoughts will be carried over to whoever you want to hear it. Whether it's just her or the entire hospital. He blinked for a moment. I can talk to her even though I'm dead? I guess it couldn't hurt to try. Reluctantly, he placed his hand on the squishy back of the short man. Try to relax, this is your first time doing this, so getting tense won't work at all. Okay. He said, putting ease to his mind as he concentrated. Here we go, scene change, zoom. She quickly jolted up, but she wasn't in the hospital. And she was outside by herself. Dark, a slight breeze and a familiar sight. Was she home? Who's there? She asked. Who's calling me? There was the feel of a hand on her back. She froze and slowly turned around, gasping at what she saw less than a few feet away from her. What she said. She couldn't even believe what she was looking at. It was a blast from the past. She looked around really quick, then back in front of her. He was just as she remembered, just as young. She felt so old looking at him. What are you doing here? She asked, still in disbelief this was happening. You're dead. I know. He said back. He slowly walked up to her, taking her hands and holding them in his. The years have been pretty good to you. He chuckled. You hardly changed at all. She felt like a kid again as she felt her cheeks heat up as her blush became noticeable to him. She looked up at him. Kayasato, is this real? He shook his head. Not entirely. I'm in the afterlife, well, kind of. It's a long story. But I'm talking to you in your dreams. This conversation is very real, though. He said as he gazed into his late wife's eyes. It had been so long since he touched her, held her, even looked at her, he had almost completely forgotten what it felt like. I'm sorry. She said, finally breaking their short silence as she moved her head down. For what? He asked. This place, I think we're here for a reason. She said. Do you remember? He looked around. They were right in front of their house in the middle of the night and the streets were completely empty. Yeah, I think I do. It's been 18 years. She said. And I haven't. She paused for a moment, trying to control her sobbing as her husband brought her close to him in a tight embrace. I haven't been able to sleep a full night, not without replaying that scene through my head. I didn't mean to upset you. He said back softly. No, it's me. I shouldn't have said those things to you. I shouldn't have hit you. I should have said goodbye, wish you good luck. I should have gone with you, but no, he interrupted. You would have died too. As it was to Mamoru and I didn't make it back. Hana and Kiba needed you. That's not true. Mamoru didn't die that day, he was hurt, but he was living with Hayashi this entire time. Kayasato was a bit surprised but understood. I see, I'm glad he was okay then, lazy dog. She smiled, scratching his back gently with her fingers. I miss you. He sighed. Yeah, I miss you too. I miss everyone. Kayasato. Yeah. You should know Kiba's just like you are. He smiled. Yeah, how about that? They stood there for a few more moments. The breeze of the night was relaxing, not too hot or cold but temperate and relaxing to the skin. How is Kiba's mate? I regret never meeting her. He broke the silence. She's not of the clan. She's kind of ditzy, but Kiba loves her. And she's a good girl. She's a good mother. Good, I'm glad our boy met someone good for him. They stood there again in silence. Just the warmth of their touch, their hands, it was such a long-forgotten feeling for both of them. It felt like all those years being separated were nothing now that they were together again. But it was just a dream. And Kayasato knew this was it for them. Soon. He said. I gotta go now, I'm on borrowed time. She let off of him and slowly backed up, still holding his hands. Okay, but is this really goodbye? He smiled at her. He brought her close again and lowered his head, bringing their lips together as she wrapped her hands around his neck. For now, yeah. Yeah, it's going to have to be like this. I don't know if I'll be able to do this again, but a man told me I needed to do this, said I had unfinished business, and oh how unfinished. She said as she kissed him again, her hands touching the top of his vest. Well, I mean, his thought never finished as his wife pulled him into a deep kiss. She led off and grabbed his hand as she walked towards their old home. She opened the door and, not even bothering to close it, began kissing him again, unzipping his vest. He finally took the hint and took his vest off, ripping at her clothes as well. In moments they were back upstairs and in their room, practically already undressed, as Tsum pushed her husband onto their bed. "You really haven't changed at all," he said back with a big grin on his face as he examined her body from head to toe. She smirked back and climbed over on top of him. "I always did like older women better. Then I can still show you a thing or two," she said as she lustfully kissed him while he flipped her over so that he was on top. Scene change, and that's what happened. Sakura's mother took the baby as they listened to what had happened to her. How Kiba's mom was attacked by Sasuke, her being captured, even the rape, which took her forever to talk about completely. But then again, wouldn't it be hard for you? Glad he's dead then, at least. "Piece of shit, deserved it," said her father in a cold voice. "Sakai, stop it," said her mother. "What? Mira, a guy like that can't." "Alright, you're right. I was getting off on a tangent." "No, it's okay," Sakura answered. "But," her father spoke up, "Kiba's earned my respect for doing what he did. I just hope he gets better so I can thank him myself." Sakura gloomily nodded. "Me too." The door from the nursery opened and Tsunade stepped through. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm finished running the last of my tests for the night. You can go see him now if you want." The three Harunos stood up, but the parents gave their daughter a small shove for her to speak up. Sakura took the hint from her parents and stepped forward. "Lady Tsunade, has anything changed?" She shook her head. "He's stable, but right now there's nothing we can do except wait and see." Sakura sighed a heavy breath as her parents comforted her, placing a hand on her back. "Okay." Scene change, Kiba was still sitting down. Sakura, Shino and his mother had tried to lift him up, but it was no use. He was plenty stuck. "Come on, Kiba, this is getting ridiculous," his mother said, grabbing his hand and trying to yank him up. "Are you even trying?" "Tsum, please let me try," Sakura said as she focused her chakra into her fists. She gripped Kiba's hand, ignoring his painful cry to her grab as she pulled as hard as she could. But nothing. Sakura huffed and let go. Kiba looked at her blankly. "What?" "I don't know why either." He looked at his hand, red from the intense grip she had on it. "Jesus, Sakura. I'm surprised I still have a hand. Maybe we should consider cutting the foundation," Shino said. "He could be stuck by something he's sitting on." As he finished, he allowed his bugs to surface from his sleeves and swarmed underneath Kiba. Kiba laughed as the bugs tickled him and quickly came back to Shino. "Try now," Shino said as he offered his hand. Kiba took his hand and tried to stand, but again nothing. "Aw, damn it." Kiba pouted, looking back up to them. Akamaru sat next to him. "I don't know why I can't stand, this is so weird." "Arf. You think so?" Kiba asked. Come to think of it, he never really did try to stand on his own. He figured he would try it since he made no effort whatsoever to begin with. "Okay. Here we go," he declared as he reached his arms out. "And what the?" Scene change, "Thank you. You have no idea how much that meant to me." Kayasato thanked the short blue man who was facing him. "No problem. Sounds like you two needed it," he replied back. They shook hands and the man turned back towards the dock opposite of where Kayasato was heading. Hey. Wait a second. Where are you going?" "I told you. I was taking a walk, think I'll go a little bit longer, I need to stretch my legs some more," he replied as he got further and further away. "What's your name?" he asked. "What's yours?" he replied. Kayasato Inazuka." "Glad I could help you out, Kyobayo, he snort. "Don't worry about mine, you'll see me around again," he said as he kept walking, waving his hand up as he got further and further away. The Inazuka stared at the short man as he kept walking. He shrugged his shoulders and turned the opposite direction, making his way to the fortress that seemed to never get closer. Well, at least now I can say I did everything I wanted to, he thought. Hopefully this would be the last time he has to walk down this bridge, and hopefully he never sees his family for a very long time for all the right reasons. Scene change, the hospital room was full as the clock struck 5 in the morning. Kiba's mother Kuramaru Akamaru along with Sakura and her parents filled the area. Sakura's mother was sitting down holding her grandson in her arms as he slept, her father sitting in the other chair fighting to keep himself awake. Tsume and Sakura stood on the same side of the bed, their eyes focused on him, still never moving for a second, hoping that the rhythm of the machine would increase and give them a green flag he would recover. He is not easily beaten, Kuramaru said, staying by his master's side. No, he's not, Tsume replied. Sakura stood there in silence listening to them. She touched his forehead, warm, not hot or cold. It was like he was sleeping. He wasn't dead, not really. But at the same time he couldn't function enough to stay awake. She wishes she had better medical jutsu at her disposal, she just wished that that's it, Sakura said out loud, bringing the focus of everyone in the room to her. Sakura? Tsume asked as Sakura removed her gloves and moved to the other side of the bed. Tsume. Do you remember when the Kazekage was captured by Deidara? Yes. Bits and pieces. I heard he survived despite the beast being extracted from him. That's because one of the village elders used a reanimation jutsu to bring him back. Gaara died, but she was able to bring him back at the cost of her life. Right? Sakai, her father said while standing up. You can't be serious, Sakura. Do you even know that jutsu? She paused for a moment, looking at her father's stern expression. He wasn't going to approve of this. He liked Kiba and respected him for what he had done for Sakura, but he couldn't risk watching his only daughter, his only child, gamble with her life right before his eyes. But Daddy, she said. Your father's right, Sakura. Her moth said, standing up as well. That's a kenjutsu for a very good reason. Your father and I may not be ninjas like you are, but we're knowledgeable about the world and know of many of the stronger forms of jutsu. That one is one of them. What if you die in the process? The jutsu doesn't work but Kiba recovers anyway. Would that be fair to him if he woke up and knew that you died for nothing? He's already dead, Tsume interrupted, still facing down at him. Sakura was the only one who could see her face frozen dry from the tears that had long since fallen down her face. Maybe you're forgetting he's more than just my son. He's a father. Did you know he and your daughter are engaged? She waited for a response for a brief moment but heard nothing. Her face never left Kiba's. And there is life blooming inside her. You do not see it, but I do. I can smell it. She's not doing this because she's desperate. She's doing this because she's your daughter. She stopped, turning around to face Mira, who was still holding Kayasato in her arms. And because she loves my son and her family. Do not ask me to sympathize with possibly losing a child because mine is all but gone. She sighed. From a mother to a mother, Mira. The room was silent for a few minutes. Mira looked down at her grandson. She didn't want to admit it, she didn't want her only daughter to gamble with her life, but Tsume had a very strong point. She turned to her husband to the right, who didn't seem very convinced it was the right thing to do but believed that his daughter thought it was. All right, she said. Sakura? Yes, Mom? Is this really what you want to do? Sakura nodded without thinking. Yes. I'm more sure about this than when I told you to. I wanted to become a ninja. Her father sighed. Okay. Sakura was still weak from everything. She hadn't even showered or done anything since she got to the hospital. She had to put the rape behind her at the moment, as hard as it was to do, and focus on saving her love at all costs. Now I just need to remember how did she do it, she thought as she put her hands together, both palms open. Lady Chiyo said she used life energy. If that's the case, will I hurt the baby? Sakura. Tsume said, now behind her with a hand on her back. Sakura tilted her head back to see her. You can use mine. You're weak, but you know how to use the jutsu. Let me help. Sakura nodded, moving the loose strands of hair from her face, her hands now glowing a pale blue color as she slowly rested them over his torso. She felt a tug on her heart, feeling her life energy being tugged, but her chakra still remained still. It's working, I just need to focus now. Scene change, his room was gone. His mom Shino and Sakura all gone. Even Akamaru was gone. It was early night with a slight shade of red in the night sky. He looked around and noticed the entire ground covered in snow as it still fell from the sky. He was in a large open field, hills scattered about and a forest on two opposite sides of where he stood. What happened? He said, holding on to his arms. Fuck, it's cold. His attention was caught as his freezing but not frozen nose picked up another scent close by. Kiba reached for a kunai but none were available. Where's my stuff? He said, panicking as he took a defensive stance with his fists. Much to his surprise, two figures landed in front of him. A young boy and a small white dog. Big me? Kiba's eyes blinked. His little self he had met so long ago was standing right in front of him, still wearing exactly what he wore in Akamaru, still being a small pup. Little me? He asked, obviously feeling the cold more as his teeth chattered. What are you doing here? He asked Akamaru, tilting his head. Listen, cold and I don't get long. Can we go somewhere warm? He asked. Oh. Sure. Little Kiba said, snapping his fingers as they suddenly appeared in the funhouse by the door. What the? He said, surprised. Well, it beats being out there. So what are you doing here? I don't know, little me. I was fighting someone and I passed out. I woke up in my room but I couldn't stand up. When I finally did, I ended up here. Oh. He replied. You should probably wake up. Yeah, let me just get right on that. Kiba replied sarcastically. He looked out the open door of the funhouse. Even though it was much warmer in the house, he was still freezing. The draft coming in from the door wasn't causing it, it was internal. Big me? Little Kiba asked. What's wrong? Kiba just stared out past the large oak tree and past the carnival that was going on. I used a forbidden jutsu in my last fight. Oh. Like that one we used to fight the demon? No, not exactly. This one was much stronger. I went all the way trying to beat him and I didn't even beat him. He still died, but it wasn't because of me. Oh, he replied in a sad tone. So does that mean you died? Kiba remained silent for another moment but finally responded. No. I don't think I'm dead 'cause you're here. I actually did die one time and I went somewhere that wasn't here. Much different. So you're sleeping? He asked, obviously confused. Probably. Kiba shrugged. But if I don't ever wake up, I might as well be dead. Little Kiba thought. Then Akamaru barked and gave him his great idea. Good idea, Akamaru. He said, grabbing Kiba's hand and running out of the funhouse. Come on, Big Me. We gotta wake you up. And I know just what can do it. Scene change, Sakura's focus was clear but she was progressing slowly. How did Lady Chio do this so quickly? Was she really that adept? It must have been true. She watched Chio both times she used the jutsu. First on herself when she fought Sasori and then when she and Naruto brought Gaara back to life. The resources to finding out more about it were difficult but she felt she knew enough to perform it. And since when Chio used it on her and she survived, maybe the same would happen here. But she felt herself weakening, her legs wobbling in a struggle to keep their balance until another hand was placed onto her back. Keeping her eyes closed, she asked out loud. Who is it? A goofy chuckle was heard before the voice spoke. Kiba is just as much my student as he is Kurenai's. And I taught him this jutsu that landed him here. I'll do whatever it takes to bring back his youthful flame. Sakura smiled to herself as the chakra she was channeling almost doubled immediately. Gai-sensei. Thank you. Then Sakura opened her eyes, but not because she wanted to. The weight under her hands, the hands on her back, the warmth of the hospital. All of it gone. She looked around, unsure of what she was looking at. Behind her was a huge open field completely encased with snow surrounded by a lush forest tinted with the flurries as well. In front of her was a large fully lit and apparently fully active carnival of some sort. Then the chill of the winter hit her. She quickly grabbed her arms together to try and warm herself up, but it didn't help any. Where am I? I'm gonna freeze if I don't find someplace warm soon. Suddenly she felt a tug at the side of her skirt. She looked down and yelled in surprise as she backed up. Who or why you? She asked, already suffering the chattering effect of the cold. Me? Little Sakura pointed to herself, the knot of her red bow slowly dancing in the winter wind. I'm you. Sakura blinked. You're me? Of course, when she looked at her she definitely saw a resemblance. Not even that she knew it was herself, but why? How could she be seeing this? Where are we? How am I able to see you? Oh, this? We're inside Big Kiba, don't you know that? Big Kiba? No. Why would I know that? She said. That jutsu, it must have taken me inside his mind, come on. Little Sakura said while pulling her towards the inside of the carnival. Wait, where are we going? She asked. I'm bringing you back. Back? Back where? Little Kiba smelt you when you got here. He's with Big Kiba right now, so let's go see them. Kiba's there? Her heart immediately fluttered knowing he was there wherever they were. She just needed to see him. Finally stopping, the two Sakuras were staring at a very tall well. It looked like a thermometer. At the very top was a red bell and a small ball was at the very bottom. Laying at the side of it was a sledgehammer with a rope tying it to the game. On the side of the hammer were the words "Test your will to live," rather than the typical "Test your strength" she had seen in most carnival games. Finally snapping out of it, she glanced over in front of the game. Kiba. Kiba, not even thinking, turned around. He knew that voice. He couldn't smell it, the extreme cold was blocking his sense of smell, but he could hear the voice he knew all too well and knew who was there behind him. Sakura? He wasn't unhappy to see her. Not at all. He was just wondering why she was there in his mind. What are you doing here? She quickly ran over to him and hugged him. I don't know. I was trying to bring you back, you're in a coma right now. Kiba sighed. Yeah, I figured. Well, at least you guys found me. Kiba? Sakura said, looking up at him. Are you okay? Kiba let go of her and stepped over to the game. He knelt down in the snow. Sakura, I'm so sorry. She knelt down behind him, putting her hands on his back. What are you sorry for? Ah, who am I kidding? Half of this all happened because of me. Probably more. Sakura was confused. Was Kiba depressed? Kiba no. He yelled, still facing the game, clawing his nails into the snow as he touched the frozen ground below it. It is, can't you see? I couldn't stop Sasuke, he took our son. I was so weak, I thought training with Guy-sensei and his team would help develop my skills better, but I couldn't even stop that sick bastard from kidnapping you, and he stopped. Sakura couldn't see his face, but it was clear his pride was broken. The howling wind of the winter blew the tears from his face onto the ground, slowly freezing the dried streams that made it about halfway down his face. I couldn't stop it, I couldn't stop in any of it. He sniffed. Sakura wanted to do nothing more but take him and hold him, but she knew he had to vent the rest of it out despite the pain it brought her to see him like this. I even pushed myself into grounds I haven't even touched yet. Do you know I could barely access the third gate while training? Going all the way to 8, what was I thinking? I had no idea what I was going in for, and in the end I couldn't even stop Sasuke. He picked his fist up and slammed it into the ground again, sending small chunks of snow in different directions. I had to be saved. And at the cost of someone else's life. My father's mean dog, he died protecting me because I was too weak to finish Sasuke myself. Kiba, that's not true, you know it isn't. Sakura said calmly, trying to bring him down from his temper. No. It is. Why don't you fucking get that? He snapped back. All of this happened because I was too weak. I'm just a stupid kid who has no idea what he's doing anymore. He coughed, sobbing into the snow, barely keeping his head up. I had to kill my own father. I couldn't even stop that from happening. He turned around to see Sakura, who was overwhelmed with emotion, constantly flowing, tears streaming down her face as their gaze met. I couldn't stop anything from happening. Shino Akamaru, I couldn't even protect them. He sniffed, staring into her shimmering eyes as Sakura could barely keep her composure in front of him at this point. I deserve this. Slap. Kiba's face hung from the side, his eyes facing down as his left cheek began to sting, slowly throbbing from the small injury Sakura gave him. How dare you? She said, struggling to keep her words together without breaking down. Sakura? No. You had your turn. Now I'm going to have mine. She said, sniffing as Kiba brought his face to face hers now. I never blamed you for me and Kayasato being captured. I never even blamed you for. She stopped. The words screamed in her mind, but she could not find the strength to say it. The thoughts and image of Sasuke toppling her, abusing her, raping her. She wasn't a virgin when he did this, but he stole so much innocence from her. She could feel down south the pain and ripping between her legs, almost as if it just happened again. I never blamed you for that, Kiba. She said, noticing Kiba's face tilted to the side again, staring at the ground in a blank expression devoid of anything close to an emotion. Look at me, Kiba. She desperately cried, touching his frozen cheeks with her icicle hands as they faced each other. Kiba said nothing but stared into her face as she continued to speak. Do you even know what you're saying when you say stuff like that? When you say you deserve this? When you say you were too weak? She sniffed, waiting for Kiba to say something, anything. But he didn't, so she continued. You're telling me that I made a mistake. That our son was a mistake. She chilled up, goosebumps covering her arms now, but she ignored it. Do you remember your fight with Pain? She didn't give him a chance to respond as she went straight forward. You told me those months you spent with me were the best times of your life. Were you lying to me? Yes, you couldn't stop Sasuke from taking us. And no, you couldn't stop that. She sobbed for a moment, regaining her composure. But it doesn't matter if you couldn't. Don't you get that, Kiba? What mattered was you tried. Kiba finally spoke up. What good does that do? Is that what they'll write on my tombstone? Here lies Kiba Inuzuka, he tried. He had no idea how much that hurt Sakura until he saw her face be taken aback from his comment. At that point he took her hands off of his face, stood up, turned around and started walking away. Kiba? Sakura asked in total shock at how little her words even affected him. Trying does nothing when you cannot ever do. He said as he slowly walked further away. I can't try. Trying never won me anything. Trying didn't stop Sasuke. Trying got my father killed, and it ruined so many things for you and our family. Wallowing in his own regret, Kiba never anticipated Sakura running up behind him, grabbing him from behind and hugging him tightly, stopping him in his tracks. Why are you doing this? Why do you set the bar so high for yourself? Can't you ever accept that there's some things we just can't stop? She tightened her hands around his waist further. We're shinobi. This is something we all accepted when we became what we did. Even if I fail 100 missions, I'll never give up on myself because I know there are people counting on me. Kiba kept his head sunk down, his cold hair tickling his face as it flew in the direction of the wind. You can't put the world on your shoulders, Kiba. You just can't. But that doesn't mean you should give up. Not when there are people here depending on you. Aside from the village losing one of its best ninja? There's me, your mother, your sister Akamaru, your son, and the one on the way. It all went in and out of his head as he wait one on the way. Kiba quickly jerked his head up and broke out of her hold, turning around to face her eye to eye. Sakura, did you just say one on the way? Her heart warmed knowing that Kiba wasn't talking about anything bad right now. It just came out, but she was glad she said it. She took his hands and placed them over her stomach. When I found you, I tried to heal you. Your heart rate was so low, I tried to use the little chakra I had left to elevate it. But I couldn't. And I never knew why until I asked Lady Tsunade when we got to the hospital. Then she told me. What did she tell you? Sakura smiled as she leaned up and kissed him. She told me the reason why I couldn't use my chakra to heal you. Sakura, are we going to? She smiled, nodding her head in happiness. Yes. Ha ha ha. Yes. Kiba's sadness almost immediately swept away by the sudden good news as he grabbed Sakura by the waist and spun her around before setting her down. The weather didn't bother them anymore. He was too happy to find out the good news, and she was too happy to know he had finally calmed down. She had never seen him like this before, well, the way he was. Unhappy, depressed, broken. It wasn't like him. How far along are you? Lady Tsunade said about 3 weeks. I'll go to a sonogram soon when we get back to the village, but Kiba, there's one thing we still need to do. Huh? What's that? She giggled. We still need to get you out of here, silly. The adrenaline lost its effect on the Inuzuka as he shivered, grabbing onto his mate for warmth. Okay. Good idea. He let go of her and they looked over to the game still sitting there. The two little versions of themselves just sat on opposite sides of the game waiting for them to come back. As they made their way back to the game, Kiba picked up the hammer. It wasn't too heavy, but Kiba knew he wouldn't be able to swing it very much before getting tired. He glanced at the meter. Test your will to live, huh? He thought as he examined it. 10 different ratings. 1. You're already dead. 2. Suicidal. 3. Go see a doctor. 4. Crybaby. 5. Facebook attention whore. 6. Maybe I want to live? 7. I don't care. 8. Get me out of here. 9. I'm living now, get out of my way. And 10. I'm Olivia E. Facebook attention whore? He asked himself out loud. What's a Facebook? He asked his little version, who just shrugged his shoulders. He didn't worry about it as he picked the hammer up into a position where he could slam it down, but stopped as he noticed another pair of hands on it. He looked to his right and saw Sakura holding it as well. Sakura? Let's do this together. He couldn't help but slide a stupid grin across his face as they held the sledgehammer together, leaning it back behind them. You ready? She asked. Yeah. I think I like being alive. Think? That doesn't sound like a very strong will to live. She joked. Heh. No, you're right. He said. Finally, he could feel his strength returning to him. Sakura's and his strength joining together as they both yelled out, slamming the hammer down so hard the head of it shattered into a dozen pieces. The small ball at the bottom skyrocketing up the meter as they both watched shoot past all 9 numbers, finally approaching the final one. In a suspenseful moment, the ball seemed to pick up even more momentum, finally shooting past the 10th meter and breaking through the bell, shattering it into even more pieces than the head of the hammer. All right? Kiba shouted, Sakura yelling in happiness as she hugged him. You passed. Little Kiba approached them, little Sakura at his side. Passed? You mean you did this? Kiba asked. Little Sakura nodded her head. Yep. You had the ability to wake up any time you wanted to, but you needed to want to get up. Then again, it made sense to him. When he was stuck sitting down, he never once tried to get up himself until the last minute. And now this. So what happens now? Sakura asked. Now? Little Kiba started. You guys can go home. Bye. He said, snapping his fingers as the world slowly widened out around them. What the? Hey, wait a minute. Kiba called out, but the world was too far blurred. Even Sakura was blurred out into nothing but white. Scene change, Kiba? Kiba's eyes adjusted to his surroundings. He looked around on a hospital bed. He was surrounded by so many people. To his right, Akamaru and Kuramaru, along with 2 other adults he had never seen before. Are those Sakura's parents? He thought. To his left, his mother Guy and the Raikage stood there, the proud Kage with his arms crossed. And in front of him, Kakashi, Shino, Naruto and Lee. Naruto's jacket was ripped up pretty badly, so he was wearing just a black t-shirt with a few bandages on his face. Lee was on crutches, but he was in good spirits. So was everybody else. What, where you're in the Cloud Village, boy? Said the Raikage. You've been in a coma for a few hours. A coma? But how did I just wake up? Kiba? A voice from the right called him. Sakura's father approached the side of the bed. My name is Sakai Haruno. I'm Sakura's father. He paused for a moment, extending his hand out. Sakura risked her life to save you after you almost died to save her. I would be honored to call you my son-in-law after seeing how far you two are willing to go for each other. As would I, said her mother. I'm Mira and I'm Sakura's mother. You don't know how much we appreciate what you've done for her. Smiling, Kiba took Sakai's hand and they shook. Thank you. Speaking of Sakura, where is she? Pup. His mother said. Kiba turned to the left side of the bed, glancing at the chair to the side. In it sat an exhausted Sakura, drained of almost all of her chakra. Sakura? He asked. She smiled. Hey. Kiba smiled back. Hey. What happened to you? He chuckled. She slightly mused back, still drained. Don't you remember anything? Remember what? Wait, that was real? She weakly giggled, nodding her head. You gave us quite a scare, Kiba. Shino spoke up, approaching the side of the bed Sakura was sitting by. He was wearing his chunin vest with only his hooded jacket covering the top of his head. His mouth wasn't covered at all, which was somewhat of a shocker for Kiba since he had only seen it once. Shino? The Aburame smirked. Don't tell me you've pulled a Naruto and forgotten me already. Are you still mad about that? Naruto shouted, much to the amusement of the people in the room. I just didn't know you would be coming. I mean, most of you guys too. The cloud is so far away, and he stopped when he noticed Hinata wasn't attached to the side of Shino like she usually was. Where's Hinata? She had a mission. As did Shikamaru and Kurenai-sensei, otherwise I'm sure they would have come. They all told me to tell you hello. Kiba laid back on the bed, his head hitting the cold sweat of the pillow it had soaked in since he was first laid there. I don't even know where to begin. So much has happened and so fast I wouldn't even know what to say. Or he stopped as he let out a large yawn. Well, you look a lot better, said Tsunade as she walked in, moving past the crowd of people and coming to the side of the bed Shino was standing at. She reached over to his chest and closed her eyes for a moment. 86 BPM and 120/80. Yep. I'd say you're definitely back to normal, Kiba, she said, taking her hand off him. You didn't trust the machine? Kiba asked. I just wanted to be sure. She then turned around to face the wreckage. We'll be leaving soon. Thank you for clearing everything for us. We all appreciate it. The wreckage nodded. That boy did a lot of good for us, taking down Sasuke and ensuring no civilian casualties. Kiba shook his head. I didn't kill Sasuke, I got saved. To Mamoru. Kuramaru spoke up. Your mother and I smelt him on you when we first came in while you were still out. Yeah, he's the one you should be thanking. If he didn't show up at the last minute, I would have been done for. Alright everyone, I think we should call it a night. Everyone but family, please leave the room, give Kiba a chance to rest. You can all come back tomorrow when we check him out to see if he's clear for discharge. Tsunade said, waving a majority of the people out of the room. The others agreed, clearing out of the room as they said their goodnights until Tsum, Sakura, her parents, and the dogs remained. We can go for tonight, pup. You should rest, Tsum said. Kiba yawned but shook his head. He looked over at Sakura, who had since fallen asleep with her head back against the wall. It's okay, Mom. You guys can, he said, unable to finish his sentence as his eyes fell shut. Tsum chuckled to herself. She was happy to see he was better and resting. Normally whenever he got hurt when he was younger, he would try and get up right away, normally making things worse. This was definitely something that wore him out. We should go too, Mira said. Tsum, I'm glad we listened to you. She nodded. They're our future. And just like she's your daughter, she will soon be mine as well. He who is my son will soon be yours. They're both our children now. Mira glanced down at her grandson, who just yawned in her arms. Tsum was right, there, the future. And in her arms, the future beyond that. We'll find a way to protect it, I'm sure of it. Scene change, Madara stepped into his laboratory and placed the syringe Kabuto had on him into a shelf on his desk. Walking behind his desk, he pressed a button underneath the center and heard a low shifting of rocks as he turned to see an entrance open up at the wall behind the desk. He stepped in and walked only a few feet before coming to a circle that stood before him on the ground, roughly about 3 feet wide and about the same in length. He stepped onto it and began to hear a low beeping sound as the crust of the circle separated from its original placement and began to project another image in front of him. On the other side, an elder man sat in a chair and wait. He was very well dressed, a long silk black jacket with a white shirt with a tall collar going to his neck which held loose and matching pants. His hair was short and cropped, colored silver and gray, suggesting his age was quite seasoned, though his eyes were both the most intriguing and possibly the most frightening thing about him. They held the same layout as the Sharingan, only a different color. A steely blue color with 3 non-moving tomo. He took a cigarette to his mouth as he lit at the image of Madara coming up on the projection. "Madara. Good to see you again," said the man. "Sasuke and Kabuto are dead," he replied. "An unfortunate loss, but what is important is the research Kabuto began. Did you find a trace sample, some type of product perhaps? Kabuto had a syringe on him when I found his body. I'm certain it's the blood sample." The man took a long inhale of his cigarette. "Then we wait," he said as he let out a long cloud of smoke from his mouth. "Understood," he replied. "Something on your mind, Madara?" the man asked. "Why did you come back now only to wait?" The man took another drag on his cigarette, pausing before letting it out, and continued. "Time travel is only available to the very rich in my time, though it is still far from absolute precision. Going back this far and being only about a decade or so off is a notable accomplishment." He then stood up, picking up a glass which contained a type of alcohol as he took a small sip. "I don't like being kept in the dark. I'm usually the one who does it," Madara replied. "We agreed that if I helped you get the item you were seeking, you would promise total support for my cause. And it is a cause I support as well. You may not like to believe it, but humanity itself is under attack in my time. I created my organization to strengthen our voice in the galaxy and achieve overall human dominance." He then sat down, inhaling then exhaling a quick hit of his cigarette. "However, after researching through ancient texts, I found a time period where humanity was at its peak. This time right now, while we are still secluded to this one planet, we are at our greatest strength. And within a short amount of time we will begin our downfall, far before we even begin to discover the existence of other planets or even more advanced technology. And you need me to help you achieve this goal?" Madara replied. "In a sense, yes." He ran his fingers through his soft hair. "I spent months and a small fortune researching the Uchiha clan. Why were they powerful? Why did they die out? What separated them from everybody else? The answer was simple: they were willing to do whatever it took to achieve their goal. And that is exactly why I need their leader to help build the foundation for human dominance. That is exactly the type of attitude I need heading this operation. If we start small from a time like this, imagine the possibilities for the future." Madara was silent for a moment, but he was intrigued. "I will accept your offer on a few conditions." The man remained silent, tilting his cigarette down to hint he was listening. "You will report everything to me. This is still the Akatsuki and I am still leading behind the scenes. When we secure dominance of the Uchiha within this generation, you will leave and never return. Of course. Once our business is finished, we can part ways, and I will hold no hard feelings if you are no longer in need of my services before then. However, I think given your wants and my, or should I say our needs, you would be wise to keep me within reach for as long as possible." "And what exactly are our needs?" "Dominance. Control," he said before taking another drag and exhaling. "You sought to bring truth to the world through the control of the 10 tails. No crimes and no wrongdoings, yet you were stopped in the end. I can provide you with the necessary tools you need to accomplish your goal, which would in a sense be accomplishing my own as well. How long will we have to wait?" 13 years, give or take." Madara said nothing for a moment before speaking up. "I see. Are you certain this person will come and he will be willing to work with us? I made sure this person will arrive in this time period. Before I arrived here, I stopped in his time myself and adjusted his time machine to take him to the exact coordinates, but in a completely different time and dimension altogether. So long as he doesn't do a complete mechanical inspection, he will arrive at the appropriate time. Getting him to join our cause, however, will be up to you. Anything else? Madara replied, growing slow irritation in his voice. No. Just do your job and I'll be sure to do mine. With this much time, I'll need to rebuild the ranks of the Akatsuki again. I think you'll find that your work to rebuild will not be necessary if all goes according to plan. Just be patient, he said as he turned his chair around. The background was a beautiful image of a star very up close. Almost as if he was looking out into space himself. Good luck. Of course, Madara said, stepping out of the projection and shutting it off once out. The man touched a dial on his chair, bringing up a projection screen. On it was an old weathered page of a book. Next to it was a picture of a moon overlooking a large village. The moon was drawn with the ripple effect of the Rinnegan, yet there were several tomo of the Sharingan scattered throughout the body of the circle. The picture was colorless, but he knew what he was looking at. The eye of the moon, brilliant but so short-sighted. No, Madara, I'll have to cut our deal long before that happens. He smiled to himself, inhaling his cigarette and letting out a cloud of smoke as he exited the projection, reinstating his stare to the image of the star in front of him. Scene change, and not too long after we returned to the village, your mother and father were married and you were born soon after, Selena. Sum proudly said, finally finished with her long tale. However, she seemed to have forgotten the attention span of most young children. She glanced to the left, then the right. They were both sleeping. She slapped her forehead. I knew they wouldn't be able to stay awake for all of it. She glanced up at the clock, reading 1:42 am. At that moment she heard a knock at the door. Her and Kuramaru went to answer, opening the door. She smiled at the two figures on the other side. A 24-year-old Kiba and 23-year-old Sakura stood side by side. Kiba had since grown a few more inches, reaching about 6 feet in height. His hair had grown only slightly and his overall appearance remained the same. Sakura had since graduated to the rank of Jonin, now wearing full shinobi attire just like Kiba did. She, however, remained the same height. Very little had changed about her. In fact, they hardly looked any different than when she had imagined them younger while telling the story. Hey Ma. Hello, you too. She stood aside as they entered, Akamaru coming in after. They just fell asleep. Akamaru greeted Kuramaru. Senpai. Akamaru replied. He had only just begun speaking roughly a year ago. Kiba always enjoyed the barks, but having a talking dog was definitely an asset as well. Though it did help that whenever Akamaru wanted to, he could bark to communicate with his master to hide what they were really talking about. He held a normal speaking voice, actually sounding a lot like Kiba, just less mature and slightly higher pitch. He was still a puppy by the way he acted. The two parents walked into the living room to find their kids curled up on separate sides of the couch. Kiba scooped his son up, Sakura doing the same with her daughter, ignoring their annoyed moaning and groaning at being disturbed in their sleep. Thank you so much for watching them, Sum. Sakura said. Of course. You two both had a mission. I couldn't just say no, she sighed. I'm getting old anyway. Tsunade has been giving me more time off despite me being the head tracker of this village. Kiba chuckled. Don't worry, Mom, she'll have to call you again. He said as they approached the door, Sakura in front of him as she opened it and stepped out. I thought you didn't like people sleeping on the couch? She shrugged. They asked me about how you two met. I had forgotten how long of a story it was. Her son smiled. Hopefully they didn't miss too much. He turned back to the door and exited the house. See you soon, Ma. We'll be by next week. He quietly said as they headed home. Sum waved to her son and daughter-in-law as she closed the door behind them. She walked back into the living room, sitting back down as she glanced across the room above the fireplace. She stood up and approached one particular picture, picking the frame up and glancing down at it. It was a recent family photo of the family taken when Kayasato graduated from the academy. Graduated when he was 8. He has potential, she said. Kayasato stood in the middle with his headband over his forehead, carrying a large grin over his face. Sakura stood to the left of the picture with one hand over his shoulder where Kiba stood on the other side. Selena was hugging him while looking at the camera, giving a peace sign to the photographer. She sighed, setting the photograph down as she looked at one next to it. A picture of her and her husband at their wedding. She still found humor on that day since Kayasato was completely taken off guard by Tsum mashing a piece of cake into his face. Immediately afterwards, Tamamaru tried to attack Tsum but was in a stare-off with Kuramaru. It was a hilarious picture she wanted to keep. She didn't want to remember what had happened to him, only who he was in life. It helped her live without him. "We were so young and stupid," she said out loud. "That fool Tamamaru actually tried to attack you," Kuramaru said, walking up to her, giving a small limp due to a pain in his leg. "That idiot had a temper the size of a grain of rice. Never thinking, always rushing." "Heh. Yeah, he did. He just wasn't used to it." Neither was Kayasato. She laughed. Kiba had the exact same look on his face when Sakura did it to him. Eyes wide open, mouth covered in icing and whipped cream, and small strands of hair covered in topping. Some things never change. Epilogue. 7 years later. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming out and witnesses this magnificent event as we finally come to a close to this year's Chunin exams. But first, the main event everyone has been waiting for. The final round of the tournament, said the announcer from up in the stands. Both of these shinobi have worked long and hard to achieve this much progress in the tournament. Let's see if their progress deems them worthy of achieving the next rank upon the system. Ladies and gentlemen, your Chunin exam finalists. Up on the stands in the front row, Kiba and Sakura watched down as the match was about to begin and as the two contestants entered the arena, taking their separate sides with their 13-year-old daughter right by them, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Please help me welcome this year's finalist." To the left, a boy with a bright dream of becoming Hokage just like his dear OL dad and a never-give-up attitude. Please give a round of applause to Natsuko Uzumaki. The stadium lit up with applause from every side and corner as Natsuko's grin couldn't be held back as he waved back to what it looked like every single audience member. He held a remarkable resemblance to his father, spiky blonde hair, blue eyes, maybe a little bit taller than his father was at his age. He wore an orange kimono on top with same colored pants tied together with a long black sash and his Leaf Village headband on his forehead. But what separated them the most was the lack of whiskers across his face. Aside from that, they were very much alike. "Top that, Kayasato. The audience loves me." On the other side of the arena stood a 15-year-old Kayasato with his arms crossed, holding a smirk across his face. Natsuko was funny but pretty annoying at the same time. His father always told him he was just like his father, and he believed it more and more. Still, annoying or not, he was a finalist just like he was, and he knew he had to take him seriously. He had such a strong resemblance to his father, you would think you were looking at another Kiba. The few things that made him different was his outside appearance. Loose black pants tied by a purple sash and an olive green kimono, his headband also on his forehead. And in this corner, who could forget this year's rookie to beat? A young man who shows that sometimes waiting a few years to take the Chunin exams is a good idea, because he was definitely prepared to win it all when he entered. Ladies and gentlemen, the man who needs no introduction, Kayasato, Inuzuka and Takamaru. Immediately the stadium thundered a greater noise than before, causing slight hearing damage to the sensitive in the area. Even roses were being tossed down from the front row at his feet. Kayasato smirked, shrugging his shoulders to Natsuko. "Go big brother." "Woo!" His sister cheered from the stands. "I guess they love me too." He finally spoke. Takamaru was busy chasing after the roses that were falling down. He was a full-grown dog now, since he was given to Kayasato at a young age and matured like all the other Nin dogs before him. His appearance mostly resembled that of a large Rottweiler, his tail kept in full length, as Inuzuka's were completely against the cutting of a tail of a dog. "Ah, shut up, Kayasato. You're so smug it makes me barf," Natsuko said back. Kayasato knelt down and picked up a rose. Want one? It might make you feel better. He chuckled. Why don't you take that rose and shove it up your... Ladies and gentlemen, I give you this year's final round in the Chunin exams. Combatants, are there any questions? Yeah. I have one. Natsuko yelled towards the upper area where the announcer sat. How come Kayasato gets to bring in a dog? That's like having another person have him take it out. Arf. He snarled back. Get over it, Natsuko. It's how my clan fights. My dad told me your dad made the same complaint when they fought in the Chunin exams. Yeah. And my dad won. So what now? Your dad farted in my dad's face while he was on a soldier pill. You realize that's the only reason he won, right? My dad's much stronger than yours is. Is not. He snapped back. And just to prove that he isn't, I'm going to win this fight and become a Chunin. Natsuko, the rules clearly state. The announcer began flipping through the pages of a rulebook. Here. Yes. The rules clearly state that clansmen such as Aburames, Inuzukas and other shinobi who use animals or insects or anything of the like from their body are considered legal. Aburames because they are given to them at a young age and because they are a part of them, and Inuzukas because of their clan nature. It is within the rules. Natsuko huffed, pulling a kunai out and taking a stance. Fine, whatever. I work better with a handicap anyway. Kayasato scratched the side of his head, reaching for a kunai as well, taking his own stance. Well then, if there are no other questions, combatants begin. The mood of the stadium went to complete silence as the two finalists stared each other down. Takamaru giving a light woof to his master, who nodded. Okay. We'll try that. Let's wait for an opening first. In a quick blinding rush, the two genin clashed, reaching a standstill with their kunai face to face. And the fight has begun. Both shinobi seem to be showing an incredible amount of spirit and appear evenly matched. Anything can go, and it's what makes this final match the most entertaining one out of them all. Scene change. Through years of traveling, Kayasato had finally made it towards the end of his long walk down the bridge. However, he had to stop when the river began to speak to him again. He smiled with his arms crossed at the fight taking place at the moment. Good, I expect nothing less from my grandson, he said. Arf. Off in the distance, Kayasato turned towards the direction of the docks after hearing a quiet but echoing bark. He took a whiff of the air. No way. That's in the distance. Slowly coming to a clearer image was a happy running Tamamaru with his tongue hanging out of his mouth. No blindness and no peg leg. Just all happy dog. Tamamaru, he called, getting down on a knee. The eager German shepherd finally reached his master and plowed into him, not knocking him over but still setting him back some as he showered his master in licks across the face, his master ruffling his fur and ending with a hug. I never thought you'd show up. I like to keep a good thing going. His master smiled as he pet his companion again, and they stood. Kayasato glanced over to the river, but the image of the fight was gone, so instead they took their walk towards the fortress, which was less than 1/10 of a mile away at this point. I talked to her finally, Kayasato said. You did ya? Glad her and that old bag are still around. You know how much of a bother it was eatin' and sleepin' for 18 years? I'm almost glad I kicked the bucket, I am. Kayasato chuckled as they came to the base of the staircase leading to the fortress. So what did you in? Had to pick up the slack for ya, pup senpai. Poor lad was in a fight with an Uchiha and nearly bit it, but I came in and slapped him one good. I did. Granted I didn't make it, but it doesn't matter. How about that? He thought out loud. It may have explained why Kiba was in the hospital. Thank you for helping him. Like I wasn't gonna? Next generation, my friend, have to keep it safe one way or another. He happily said back. Finally reaching the top of the stairs, the dead team saw a large elevator in front of them. Nothing else around them, just a small red-skinned man sitting next to a control panel in the center of the elevator. Going up? He asked. Kayasato looked around. There really were no other doors or exits, and above them seemed miles and miles up high. Yeah. Sure. The two stepped onto the elevator and the red man pressed a button. Rather than the elevator moving up, it simply teleported the two to another dimension. Oh great, I love lines, did I ever tell you that? Tomomaru said as Kayasato looked in front of him and nearly screamed at what he saw. Far off in the distance was a tall building built in the design of a feudal lord's palace. But seemed like more than a palace as there were clouds. Clouds in a long line entering this building. Small yellow and white clouds with high-pitched and rather annoying voices slowly entering the palace, which appeared to have 4 different entrances too. As they looked ahead, the entrance of the palace said north. North? Kayasato asked out loud, looking at his dog. What's that mean? Got me. He replied. Hey! Tomomaru. Eh? You have a halo. Tomomaru tried to look up but couldn't. Instead, he took his word for it and glancing over at his master as he noticed the same. Ya do yourself. Kayasato touched the top of his head and felt the ring above it. Man. Do we have to wait in this line? You can if you want. A familiar voice said. Kayasato and Tomomaru turned to see the same short blue man approaching them. Or you can cut ahead of the line with me because you're needed. Needed for what? He asked. Who the hell's this crazy bastard? Can't I be dead for more than a minute before talking up another job? Now. I think you'll want to come with me. He said as he passed them, cutting ahead of all the small puffs of clouds. What's he talking about? He wondered out loud. He figured if he had to wait in this line, it wouldn't hurt to go ahead and get in front, whatever that meant was going to happen. They quickly followed behind him and in a few moments of walking made their way inside the palace. Inside, the Inuzuka and Nin dog were shocked at what they saw. A giant, enormous, easily 50-foot-tall red man sat in a chair with an equally tall list of paperwork crowding his desk. He waited for a spirit and every now and then a body to appear, stamp something and move on to the next person. Who is that? Kayasato whispered to the short blue man. Oh, you'll see. He stepped ahead to the desk. King Yema? I brought them here like you asked. HM? Oh yes, thank you, King Kai. King Kai? That's his name? Kayasato thought. Step forward, you two. King Yema said with a deep booming voice. Oh. Yeah. He replied as they stepped in front of his towering desk. King Yema read over their paperwork, seemingly uninterested, but reviewed it carefully. Yes, okay. Kayasato Inuzuka, it says here you were a shinobi for the village hidden in the leaves. You lived a decent life protecting the law of your village, but you stole important documents from your Hokage. Despite that, it says you died protecting your companion. Yes, sir. That's right. And Tomomaru. It says here you lived a decent life as the companion of Kayasato. You constantly picked fights with several people, namely one person named Kuramaru participated in the stealing of important documents from the Hokage and fathered several illegitimate puppies. Kayasato looked at his companion in surprise but amusement. Tomomaru simply wagged his tail. Benefits of no marriage is a blessing in itself, it is. You were the companion Kayasato died protecting. Interesting. You lived for 18 more years before finally dying from a sword wound through the shoulders. But you saved the life of another and stopped a Sasuke Uchiha. Ah yes, I remember him. Flashback, a dozen of King Yema's office workers were strapped on top of Sasuke as he struggled to make his way to the front desk. He finally made it, kicking off two and punching one off of him. Listen. King Yema said. You better behave yourself while you're in here. Sasuke finally kicked on his Sharingan and knocked the rest of the office workers off of him as he glared directly into King Yema's face. Sasuke Uchiha? Your file shows murder, rape and conspiracy to commit genocide against your former village. A person of your reputation doesn't get a chance to plead his case. He yelled, raising his judge gavel up. Down you go. And stay there. He slammed it down, causing the floor underneath Sasuke to open up, the dead shinobi falling in, his yells echoing as he plummeted into HFIL. End flashback. Yes, I dealt with him not too long before you two arrived. Another hard criminal sent down below. Excuse me, King Yema? Kayasato asked. But King Kai said you needed to see us? Yes, I know what I said. We have a bit of a mix-up between dimensions and you're the first one to come out of yours recently that I haven't sent down to HFIL. I'm sorry, but this is all really confusing to me. Dimensions? What mix-up? King Yema cleared his throat, finally giving the three in front of him his full attention. You came through the northern galaxy, however your present time is of a different dimension compared to others. When you die there are no other dimensions, only the afterlife. However, there are several different dimensions of times. Take for example your planet Earth. There are thousands of different dimensions from the exact same planet existing in different windows of time. That's just the way it is. Hey King Yema. Kayasato and the others looked over to see another dead man jump down in front of his desk. He had an interesting look about him. Dressed in an orange martial arts uniform and a blue shirt underneath. His hair was spiky going out in different directions. He noticed the two next to him in that moment. Oh hey. You must be the two guys King Yema called in, right? Kayasato looked puzzled. What the hell's going on? I think I liked the bridge better than this. Yeah, I guess. He looked over at King Yema. I'm sorry, but can you please explain this to me? I have no goddamn idea what's going on. The man in the orange suit spoke up. I'm the one who asked King Yema to call you two in. His happy appearance suddenly turned serious. My name is Goku and I need your help. I'm Kayasato and this is Tomamoru. What exactly can we do to help anyway? Someone came from the future to my time. When he left to return to his own time, I asked King Kai to check to make sure he made it back okay. When he did, he couldn't find him anywhere in any field of time. That's when we asked King Yema, who told us he was in a different dimension itself, your dimension. Our dimension? He asked. I'm still new to this. Besides, I'm dead. We're dead. How can I help your friend when none of us can even get to the living world? Ahem. King Kai coughed. I think you're forgetting my communication method, Kayasato. He blinked but remembered. You want me to talk to him? I don't even know who I'm looking for. Not him. Your son. What? He was taken aback. Absolutely not. I'm not bringing Kiba into this. Kayasato. Goku said, getting his attention again. None of us have a choice in this. In my dimension we have these items called Dragon Balls. If you collect all 7 you are granted 2 wishes. He folded his arms. This person came back from the future where they didn't have the Dragon Balls anymore and took them back with him to bring back his friends who had died in an attack a long time ago. He has the balls, and if we don't get them back they could fall into the wrong hands. And if that happens, scene change, black smoke came up from the forest after a large crash was heard. A large machine laid in one large chunk, several smaller pieces scattered around the ground showing signs of an inability to function. On the floor laid a man mid-20s, by the look of it his long hair touching the ground covering his face. His black pants were torn in several places, slight cuts and bruises visible in those open areas. His blue jacket was the only thing not damaged from the looks of it, despite the sleeves being ripped off, but it seemed like it had been done already before. The patch on the side of his shoulder was still visible for all to see. Capsule Corp. Slowly Madara approached the body of the man laying there. Next to him was a brown bag, the flap laid open as a small orange ball with 4 red stars rolled out from it and stopped slightly in front of it. Right on time, he said out loud. He peered down to see the other 6 balls in the bag giving a slight yellow aura around it. He chuckled to himself, his Sharingan peering through the hole in his mask as he gazed upon the 7 balls next to the unconscious body. Soon everything will be mine. Scene change, we're all done.
Thank you for your views, likes, subscriptions, and overall support of my ongoing efforts to bring great content to all of you. Check out my Patreon for more mature fanfiction. The link is in the description and like everywhere on my channel.